Hi everyone, good afternoon once again. Harriet again, and our next presenter is Ernesto. Ernesto is Atlas Core Class 17 Fellow working with HRC, and his webinar today is going to be focusing on taking a deeper look into the intersectionalities. So Ernesto is going to be presenting with his supervisor, Jordan Long, and they'll be telling us exactly what it is that they have in store for us. So Ernesto, please, you can take on the presentation.
Hi, well, thank you. It's pretty new to be on this end of the webinars. I don't know a lot of people are joining or not, but Carrie told me that I can see your questions on the bar, and if you have any questions throughout the presentation, I can write it down. Throughout what Jordan is saying, if it's a burning question, please write in caps so we can address them immediately, but if not, we can address them at the end, and that will make the conversation flow better, I think. Just wanted to present, actually it's Jordan who's gonna be doing most of the presentation. Jordan is my friend and supervisor here at the Human Rights Campaign. To give a little bit, he will do a better job introducing himself, but he has a master's in legal anthropology from the University of Chicago and his bachelor in anthropology from Miami University and a JD from University of Michigan Law School. And most importantly, I think that what I've seen is that he puts the subject of intersectionalities through his work and throughout his life, really. And to me, that's really important. The way I understand it, and this probably may be a new topic for many of you, and for some others may not be, but it's just about how you see power relationships and where do you sort of like fit in the current way that the system is set. For example, when we take a look at or privilege as male privilege, how do you see the relationship that that has with women, and how can you implement that into your own work, and how can you, most importantly, be aware of the circumstances of oppression and power relationships that can form. And I know that we all have very diverse lines of work. So I think it's really, really important that we take a deeper look at who are the populations that we are serving and who are we working with, and how we can do our jobs better, and how can we address specific needs of specific populations, and not just put everyone in one single basket and feel that that's it, that we've been the most inclusive that we can be. So again, if you have questions, you can type them in. If you can say hi to just know who is there, we can start.
Great, thank you for the introduction, Ernesto. So as Ernesto said, my background is in anthropology and law, which is kind of a unique, I'm not the only one in the world, obviously, but in law school, I was one of the few people who studied social sciences and especially studied anthropology. With anthropology, I looked at social identities, and the way I like to define anthropology as the way we understand ourselves and others. And then the law, obviously, is about the categories and the legal categories for how society is ordered. From there, I've been working in the LGBT movement, so the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender movement for roughly 10 years or 11 years since my first internship during my undergraduate education. I'm now an associate director of HRC Global, where I get to work with fellows like Ernesto, and a great team here at the Human Rights Campaign, where we focus on equality for LGBT people in America, and now since the launch of the Global program 2 years ago, throughout the world. Prior to coming to HRC, I worked for a youth and student organization in Brussels called IGLIO, and that stands for the International LGBTQ Youth and Student Movement. So for about 4 years, I was working on a group, or with a group, and an identity category that was already at an intersection of identities. We were dealing with sexual orientation and or gender identity as well as age and youth. And so the organization as a whole took an intersectional approach to our work. As Ernesto mentioned, intersectionality is the study or the concentration on the intersections between forms of systems of oppression, domination, or discrimination. The concept comes out of the feminist movement here in the US, where there was a group of Black feminists, African-American feminists, who realized that feminism wasn't actually accounting for all of the discrimination, the oppression that existed for this particular group. And it was an academic, that was in the 70s that kind of the term began to be used, the idea began to be spread. And then in 1989, a scholar called Kimberlé Crenshaw actually coined the term intersectionality to talk about these interrelated systems of oppression or domination. And the idea, it was in the webinar invitation, I think on Google Hangouts. The idea is that a Black woman who is discriminated in the workplace in America is not, you can look at the discrimination of whether a white woman would be discriminated or whether a Black man would be discriminated. So there's only two those are two different systems of discrimination. One is racial and the other is based on gender. But there wasn't an idea to take into account the fact that the social identity in that moment was that this person is both Black and a woman. So intersectionality tries to account for that situation. Ernesto suggested that I do an exercise. And so if you have a pen and paper in front of you, I'd like you to draw a 6-sided star like this. So just, six points on this star. And then next, take just a couple of seconds to think about your own identities, the parts of your identity that you think about when you introduce yourself, when you think about yourself, how you might frame that. So how you might, I'd like, for instance, I'm going to put lawyer on here because that's part of my identity. I also put anthropologist. So yeah, for about 30 seconds or so, just go ahead and fill in this 6-sided star.
Yeah, and the idea is just to try to see what are the most important identity markers, or the ones that come into your mind when you think about yourself, which is the way that you present to the world. And I can bet that they have changed from the time that we were in our home countries to the time that we're here. I can almost guarantee that.
So for me, I wrote down lawyer, anthropologist, activist, queer, runner, and dog lover. These are all things that are important to me. And as Ernesto was saying, kind of the important takeaway, if we were all in person in the same room, I'd do an exercise where we could compare each other's. And when we match up, for instance, Ernesto as activist, I would write Ernesto's name down next to it. But the takeaway from this, and even if we were in person, is that these aspects of our identity change depending on the place that we're in. I don't have American on here. When I lived in Brussels, where I was for 5 years, I would always have American, because that's the first thing anybody ever noticed about me, was that I walk, I talk, I look, I act like an American when I'm not here in America. In America,
The States.
In the United States of America, thank you. Most people are American, so that's not a defining aspect of me.
And I can say the same, that in El Salvador, I never put Latino, and to be honest, that's something that I have never gotten to use before, other than not even when you go to a party. It's not a Latin party in El Salvador. It's just a party.
Right.
But here is like a new marker that is part of my identity course.
So that was just a little exercise to talk through to think about the way social identities are a part of us. They're a part of something that we do choose ourselves, but it's also something that society chooses for you and people around you choose. So intersectionality, back to the topic. As we said, it's the study of oppression, domination, or discrimination, and the interrelatedness between those aspects of identity. And so I want to now point out the difference between intersectionality and this interrelatedness between oppression and multiple discrimination, which many people have probably heard the term multiple discrimination. And this is something that legal systems, especially in Europe, are trying to grapple with right now. So intersectionality has to do with understanding the way social identities exist, and the multitude of them exist at any one time. Multiple discrimination is looking at how to take into account when there has been a harm committed against someone, and the legal system needs to take into account that harm based on different protected categories. So, and I know the European system better than the American system at this point. In Europe, the protected categories are race or ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, religion or belief, age, and disability. Those are the 6 protected classes according to the European, or protected categories according to the European Constitution or the European treaties. However, when you take a claim of discrimination to court, you have to choose which of those 6 categories you want to claim in court. You can't claim more than one of them in the same court case. So multiple discrimination stems from when a harm has been committed and your legal recourse. There are almost no legal systems that account for that intersection of identities and when discrimination has taken place based on that intersectional identity. The UK has made a stab at it, but even that's not perfect. So to compare the two, multiple discrimination, a legal harm has had to exist, where intersectionality is the recognition of the social situation of multiple strands of identity. So that's a difference that's important to me as an anthropologist and a lawyer. And for me, intersectionality, though it comes from understanding systems of oppression and their interrelatedness, gives way to celebration and to recognizing the interrelatedness of identities and actually promoting awareness, again, celebrating that interrelatedness instead of looking only at a harm or at oppression that has existed. So I hope that's clear. As Ernesto said, if you have any questions at this point, at any point, please feel free to type them. So when I was working at IGLEO, the youth and student, the LGBTQ youth and student organization, I built up our work around intersectionality when it became a focus area for the organization at the end of 2013 and beginning of 2014. And so what I did was I convened 4 roundtables, 3 of which were in Brussels and 1 of which was in Strasbourg, France, where I brought stakeholders from both the LGBTQ movement, the youth and student movement, and then actors in different categories or different identity strands. And those 4 identity strands were socioeconomic class, gender, disability, and race and ethnicity. What we did was we looked at how the different social movements had formed at a specific time and only focused on whatever that particular identity category was. So most organizations only work on one aspect of identity, whether that's socioeconomic class or sexual orientation and gender, disability, etc. So each of the roundtables met, and we had a full day of just teasing out the different topics, the similarities between the movements, how the movements do or do not recognize internal diversity, the communities that they represent. And then we tried to get some ways forward. At the end of the summer, actually just before I started here in Washington at the Human Rights Campaign, there was a roundtable that brought rapporteurs from each of the former roundtables to bring all of the discussions together and come up with some common themes that arose out of each of the 4 thematic roundtables, and to talk about ways forward. I have statements from each of those 4 roundtables that I'm going to pass on to Ernesto to disseminate to you, as well as a position paper that was a result of the final roundtable, that was the cumulative roundtable. So it's an organizational position paper for IGLEO. And so to reference something I just glossed over, a key aspect of intersectionality and this kind of social movements, both in Europe and in the United States right now, are that all of the social movements have been focused on a single strand of identity without taking into account internal diversity. And that's it's been a challenge of movements like the Human Rights Campaign.
Can you give an example of how?
Sure. So the Human Rights Campaign we were formed in 1980, 35 years ago, focusing on the inclusive legislation and inclusive leaders for the cause of LGBT people. So we only focused on sexual orientation and gender identity. The NAACP here in the United States focuses on African Americans and Black civil rights. And it's been similar in Europe, where the European Disability Forum focuses only on disability. So that, for instance, so that's historically has been the way that social movements have been organized. It's been fairly recently that intersectionality as a concept has gained traction in social movements. And again, that's because the legal system has been set up, and jurisprudence here in the United States has been based on single strands of identity. So now the movements are, there's a pivot going on to figure out how to account for internal diversity and how to promote equality for all without reinforcing kind of divisions between people based on difference. So at IGLEO, I was spearheading this work. These roundtables, as I said, were the start of that, resulting in those statements in the position paper. Some ways forward that we found were an emphasis on autonomy. So that's the ability to self-define and not be put into boxes or be put into categories on anyone else's terms. Another one is a human rights approach. No matter what identity strand you're working on or what intersections you're trying to take into account, having an approach based in human rights and international concepts of dignity, fundamental fairness, equality, and liberty. Other key concepts are representation and leadership. So that comes with autonomy and not speaking for other people, but having actual meaningful participation of people who live intersectional lives and have intersectional identities. And then collaboration between different social movements, making sure that organizations are speaking to each other, aligning goals when appropriate, and again, taking into account the internal diversity by borrowing and relying on expertise of the social movements that have existed for decades. And with IGLEO, a key approach that we use was norm criticism. So norm criticism is an approach really that's come out of, when it comes to social movements, it's come out of the Nordic states and the Scandinavian countries. Norm criticism looks at how privilege actually operates on these social identities that we all have, and how privilege can be used to oppress. And then norm criticism is an approach that teaches everyone about norms and how privilege works, so that if you understand it, you can work to make sure privilege doesn't oppress, but that social identities are used to, again, affirm and to celebrate. There's a great resource out of Sweden that I'll also pass on to Ernesto, called Break the Norm. It emphasizes a norm critical approach across society. And it's a way, again, to celebrate intersectionality, but get away from the oppression, the domination, the discrimination. And everyone's still figuring this out. As I mentioned, HRC has been around for 35 years. Other organizations have been around for much, much longer, doing really, really hard work to represent one community, one identity class or identity group. And so it takes a lot to shift and to pivot and to figure out how to effectively represent the diversity within movements, and to change the law and the system, so that everyone has equality and is included. So I hope that was understandable.
Yeah.
It was quite a lot for 20 minutes.
Yeah, I remember it's just a basic, this is a topic that you could do your master's on, probably. This is just an introduction. Just if you are curious about this, just Google it, find more information. I will share the links that Jordan said, the information and papers that he said. But most importantly is that look at your work as a holistic, try to gain a holistic approach of what we do. I know that many of us are working on specific issues, but inside those issues, let's say that you're working with refugees. I was on a conference a couple of weeks ago. It was about the situation in Syria and how refugees are affected and how it affected LGBT refugees. Because if you go to a refugee an organization that is working with refugees, they know how to deal with subjects of inclusion, of exclusion, when it comes to race, when it comes to xenophobia and things like that. But when talking about a specific homophobia inside the same group of refugees or asylum seekers, they really had no clue how to address those issues. And if the people went to LGBT organizations, they didn't know how to deal with xenophobia or racism. The same happened to me in experience working in communities where you see a problem, for example, access to water. Of course, it affects the community as a whole, but it affects women completely different, in a completely different way, because when there's no water in the community, it's usually the women, the ones that go and try to find the water and bring it back home. And it also affects especially different younger women who are the ones that are usually sent by their mothers to do the hard work. So trying to look at the whole approach, try to look at not painted all with the same color, but look at specific needs, can help us do our work better. And this goes in different issues like economic empowerment. I think about how this affects women of color different than white women and the opportunities they give, or undocumented people here in the United States or back home. Just try to look at different approaches.
Yeah, another example to jump off of you is looking at homelessness and socioeconomic status and social inclusion. There are a disproportionate amount of young LGBT people who are homeless. And it's not a given fact that oh, you're LGBT, that means you're at risk of homelessness. There are very clear explanations regarding stigma, family support, etc. And there are 2 articles I'll also pass on through Ernesto. And so it's looking at sexual orientation as a risk factor for homelessness and a trigger for homelessness, but then also looking at what happens once these LGBTQ young people are homeless. Are service providers for homeless people, are they stigmatizing young people? Do young people have access to the services and to shelters? And then more importantly, are LGBT people in shelters, are they being discriminated against by the service providers? Are they being discriminated against and harassed by other service users? Are they being exploited? All of these things are the intersection of sexual orientation, youth, and homelessness. That it's really hard to build the capacity of people to be able to account for it all, but it's just considering what privilege or what assumptions in your own activism and in your own service might you be bringing that could exclude anyone. And that's not an easy kind of question to be constantly asking. So it's important to step back every now and then and to ask, am I carrying any assumptions in the service work that I'm doing? Because I know that you're all doing great service here through Atlas Corps.
Okay. I don't know if you guys have questions. I haven't seen anything typed in, and Jordan's time is running short. But if you, let's just give it a couple of minutes. If you guys have questions, just let us know. And if not, if you have a specific question, you can email me and I'll pass it to Jordan.
Like I said, I'll pass on some materials to Ernesto. I'm trying to get my hands on a PowerPoint that gives some more background into the concept and the approach of intersectionality that I'll pass on through Ernesto along with my email address.
I don't see any questions, Harriet.
Oh, yes, Ernesto, this has been really nice. Thank you to you and thank you to Young. I'm sure there is questions, but probably next time. It would be very helpful if we could have the reading materials, and also, like Young has said, to give at least an introduction of the whole concept. We do have interest in knowing more about the whole concept, so if you could be kind enough to share that information with us, that would be very helpful. And also, if there are materials or links that you have and you can share immediately after the webinar, it would be helpful so that at least they go along with the
Okay, yeah, I will. Oh, I don't know if you want to address this question of Julie. Being a US-based organization, how does HRC engage global populations in a way that recognizes the unique intersectionalities of LGBT populations in certain country or social groups?
That's great. It's a very good question. So, as I mentioned, HRC Global, the team that Ernesto and I are both on, is only about 2 years old. So we're actually figuring out exactly how to do that. We're about a 200-person organization that has been only focused on the United States and domestic issues. So far, since I joined in October, what we're doing is working with local organizations to figure out how we can share the experience of the Human Rights Campaign to strengthen efforts that already exist. So for instance, there was a speaking tour by a transgender woman in the Philippines. She's actually a model who currently lives in New York, but she's from the Philippines. And she went back to the Philippines to do the speaking tour. When HRC Global, what we were able to do was to work with Gina to figure out the needs of the population in the Philippines. We were also working with the local group in the Philippines. And we did a media training on top of her speaking tour for trans activists in the Philippines, because we have great experience in media training here at HRC in Washington, and it's something that they they needed and they requested. So we work with them to help. We work with local groups in their own context to define what objectives our partnerships can pursue. We don't go in trying to deliver a message that is ours, but crafting an approach together that takes into account needs and different contexts.
Ernesto, we are running out of time. Thank you so much, Jordan and Ernesto. If we still have any more questions, kindly send them over to Ernesto and you will get direct responses from them.
Yeah.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, thank you guys, has been great. And if you have questions, send me an email or we can talk it over during parties and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks so much everyone for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.